Hey y'all, welcome back to the Revolve Podcast, where grief and loss are a journey, not a final destination. I am Dr. Lucretia Cook, but you can call me Dr. Lala. Today's episode is all about what I like to call repowerment. That's a bold, beautiful decision to stop just surviving and start reclaiming the strength and purpose that grief tried to steal, right? This is where your healing becomes an active part of your life, right? Where you're making conscious steps to pursue healing, to get out of that hole of depression that you may be in, to let go of the grief that's been holding on to you, right? So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about repowerment. Because here's the thing about survival. When we're surviving, we're breathing, but we're not living. Right? There's a difference between being here and existing and truly living life. Right? Being constantly vigilant, being afraid of what was going to happen next. These are some of the things that grief do to us. I can remember when my parents, their accident happened. My daughter was 4 or 5, I think, when that happened. And I would be at the hospital every day until 12, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And baby would refuse to sleep. She could not sleep until I got home. And it didn't matter how late it was. But because of her experience, right? The fear that was associated with being gotten out of bed. That made her be vigilant. Because the night of my folks' accident, we had actually just put her down. And so I had to get her out of bed. And that's when she learned that the B-Day had died and the nanny was in the hospital. So for her, me being away from home was scary. And her way of dealing with it was to wait up for me. It didn't matter what time of night I came in, she was going to be up. And as soon as I walked in and she was able to give me hugs and kisses, she would go right to sleep. But that's what grief does to you, right? And for little ones, they might not even have the language for it. They don't have the language for it. But that's an example of vigilance, right? Sometimes it causes us to shut down emotionally. For me, it was one of those situations where if you even looked at me too long, I would start crying. I would. You didn't have to say anything. I would just completely shut down and dissolve into tears. And for some folks, they become numb. Life is happening around us, but we don't notice. We're not allowing anything to affect us, right? And grief convinces us that just making it is enough. If I can just get through the day, that's really all that matters. If I can just survive the day, that's all that matters. But the truth is, God created us for more than just survival, right? And during this season, a lot of us learn to cope, right? And some of us mistake being able to cope with being healed. And they're not the same, right? Because you can learn to cope with the madness and the chaos. But that doesn't mean that those areas are healed, right? Because surviving isn't the same as living. It's not. And repowerment begins the moment we acknowledge that we are meant to thrive and not just exist. We are meant to be able to live our best lives. And that's not to say that we won't have pain, that we won't experience heartache, that bad things won't happen. That's not to say that. But in the midst of those things happening, you can still have joy. Right? You can still be happy despite all of those things happening. Repowerment is where we shift from being powerless to being purposeful, right? And being able to recognize that the strength that you need already exists within you. You are so much stronger than you know, so much stronger than you give yourself credit for. You've been through things and you're still standing when other people would have folded by now. Do you hear me? Somebody else may have folded if they had to go through what you're going through. Someone else may have given up. Someone else may have said that they didn't want to live this life anymore if they had to go through what you've been through. Whew, Jesus. But you chose to stand. You chose to believe God's promises. You chose to make intentional choices to reclaim joy and peace and confidence. You chose to reestablish your spiritual authority, to be able to declare and decree the word of God over your life. You chose to tell the enemy, you cannot have my life. You don't have power over my situation. You chose to do that. That's what you did. And so repowerment doesn't mean that your life suddenly gets easy. It means that you begin to see yourself differently. That you begin to see yourself in the way that God sees you, right? And you stop accepting the lie that grief and loss, your life experiences, disqualify you from having joy. That's what repowerment means, right? And so how do we do that? A good place to start is anchoring ourselves in the Word of God. 2 Timothy 1:7 says, "For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power, love, and self-control." Philippians 4:13 says, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Isaiah 40:31 says, those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. And these scriptures aren't just meant for inspiration. They're instructions, right? They remind us that God has already equipped us to stand, to choose power over fear, and to rise with renewed strength. Now, the important thing is to remember that you can't do these things alone. You do these things with God. God strengthens you to be able to do these things, right? And as always, utilize your therapist, because therapy helps us to build, right? Use it in combination with your faith. Combine the two. Let them work together, because our faith restores our identity and purpose, and therapy uncovers hidden patterns and empowers healthy coping skills. And when we do those things together, they help us to develop emotional boundaries and spiritual clarity. Because one of the most important things we can do in this season of our lives is to stay connected to God. Right? And to also stay connected to ourselves. Because sometimes when we're going through things, we become disconnected. So embrace Jesus and therapy, so that we can build the kind of strength that lasts. Because these aren't temporary fixes, right? Because one guarantee in life is that life is gonna life. It's not always gonna be easy. It's not always gonna be unicorns and rainbows. That's just a reality. But you can overcome it, right? And some of the things that you can do to help reclaim your strength, to help build your strength, is like daily declarations. Speak life over yourself, right? Because our words have power. And I think sometimes we forget that we can create our own reality based on the things we say. Because if you wake up every day and your first thought is, today is going to be a horrible day, guess what? Today's going to be a horrible day. And the opposite is also true. If you wake up in the mornings and you say, this is the day that the Lord has made, I will rejoice and be glad in it, that also can be true. Because even when things happen, we can choose to rejoice and be glad in that day. We can choose to do that, right? We don't have to allow our experiences to shape our response. My husband often says, my response is my responsibility. So however I respond to any situation, that's my responsibility. So again, I get to choose whether I'm going to have a positive response or a negative response. And we get what we put out. So if we're always putting out negativity, guess what we're going to get back? Negativity. And the same can be said for positivity. If you're putting positivity out, positivity comes back. Something else we can do is journal. And we can use prompts like, what am I reclaiming today? I'm reclaiming joy. I'm reclaiming purpose. I'm reclaiming healing over my life. I'm reclaiming my family coming back to Christ. You can also reconnect to your purpose through service. Maybe you're someone who likes to volunteer at the Boys and Girls Club. Maybe you enjoy serving at a women's shelter. Right? In this season, it's important to identify triggers and tools that help us to respond with power and not panic. Right? Because here's the reality. Sometimes in life, when we're going through these heavy seasons, everything makes us panic. And we're always looking for the other foot to drop. Right? So instead of doing that, we want to build healthy habits. Right? Because every small act of clarity, every intentional moment of self-love is a form of reclaiming your power. Right? Repowerment is an open door. You just need to walk through it. Right? What strength has grief tried to silence in you? And I say tried because the truth is grief does wear you out. It does. It can be exhausting. Right? Sometimes it's so heavy that it's the only thing that you can think about. It completely consumes you. Right? What part of your purpose feels buried but not gone? Because sometimes grief will take that from us too, right? It'll make you forget what you were called to do, who you've always believed you were called to be. These are just some of the things that grief does to us. But I want you to remember that you're not behind. You're not lost. This is an opportunity to become the very best version of yourself. The version that God is calling you to be. This is an opportunity for you to rise to the occasion. Not for anybody else, but for you. Right? Because you have to do these things for yourself. For yourself first. Because you can't give from an empty cup. If you're completely depleted, you have nothing to give to the people who depend on you. Right? So it's time to rise to the occasion. And to believe that strength doesn't have to be loud to be real. right? It doesn't have to be loud to be real. It's that still quiet voice saying, you know what? I'm going to keep going another day. This is hard, but I've done things that were harder. This is tough, but I'm tougher, right? This is what we're called to do. And so today, as we close out, I just want to remind you that you are so much stronger than you know, and that you are not defined by your life experiences. This is only one small chapter in the book of your life, right? Only one small chapter. But you can do this. You can do this. So if this episode has spoken to you, subscribe. We're going to walk through healing together. Share this episode. Someone in your life might need it. They might need this message. And send me a message. Let's talk about your journey to repowerment. And until next time, keep choosing healing. Keep choosing joy. I love y'all. Bye.